So, welcome to Tara Institute. My name's Damien, and I've been leading this month's Monday nights. And the topic that I've been covering is really just to introduce you to this text by Atisha. So, Atisha was an Indian scholar, yogi, whatever, he took many different roles, but he was basically a very well-educated scholar and practitioner in India, and he went to Tibet, and he's responsible for a great many of the traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. And this is one of his key texts, which is called the Jewel Rosary of an Awakening Warrior. And, sometimes the language seems a bit flowery, but the one thing I like about the title is this idea of it being a collection of beads. Like in a rosary, you have a collection of beads and they make a whole, but individually they're also an individual bead, or in this case a jewel. So the 111 lines of this text, so it's quite short, each line or each pair of lines, often the advice is in a pair of lines, can stand on its own. And so I hope that, that when you, after this month, I hope that there's a couple of things here that stand out for you as very useful. And they might be quite simple, but just something that you can remember. And then when you're in a particular situation, that memory of these lines comes up and it's then able to benefit you. So that's the real function of all these thought transformation texts, is to, if possible, to memorize them and then to, draw from that memorization whenever you need it, or whenever you are in a circumstance or something where it can either inspire you or help you or explain something that you've experienced. So there's lots of different ways that thought transformation texts can work with us. So it's good to sort of uplift your motivation for, listening to this, for like reading this, or, being exposed to it. So let's just spend a moment. So think of your natural altruism to help others. So even though your wish to help others may be conditional, it might be just to your children, or just to your parents, or just to your dear friend, or something sort of limited and conditional, but still that wish to benefit another person is really it's a very precious state of mind. So take that altruistic inclination and just imagine that it becomes expansive to every living being, and also unconditional. So not restricted by liking somebody, not restricted by somebody giving you things, or employing you, or giving you money, or somebody very pleasant to you. So make it as much as possible unconditional, the wish to benefit others. So I'll just cover a couple of lines in here tonight. So the first one is line number 61. So it says, when hearing any offensive words, view them as an echo. So this is a consequence of the cause and effect. So basically Buddhism is, let's say, like many other religions, including Christianity, recognizing that cause and effect is the way that the world operates. So in Buddhism, the Sanskrit word for this is karma. Karma. And karma basically means action. So unfortunately in English the word karma has got all these sort of odd connotations, but the word karma, if we translate it into English, it basically means action. And the idea is that any action has a consequence. So an action has a result. And it has an immediate result, but it also has a future result. And so one of the future results is that, like if we use this example here, offensive words. So if I am particularly insulting to somebody or offending them intentionally, belittling somebody, offending them, abusing them, then that action, and this is just from my side, that action has a consequence. And from a karmic point of view, one of the consequences is that I am establishing an habituation to being offensive. We can understand that if I am offensive to others, I am establishing an habituation to be offensive. And so also the explanation is that the other aspect of that consequence is that I am also creating a circumstance where I will experience that behaviour myself by being offended. So here the line says, when hearing any offensive words, view them as an echo. So the aspect of an echo is that we yell out to some cliff or valley or something, and we get our own voice back. So the idea here is that if I become offended, that I think, instead of thinking, oh, that person is terrible, I can't stand them, somebody should do something about them, all this sort of idea of retribution or indignation. So instead of that, we think this offence that I feel is merely an echo of my own previous offensiveness. Okay, so we can examine whether or not that's feasible or even reasonable, because if we look at the circumstances where we feel offended, sometimes we feel offended when the other person has absolutely no intention of offending me. They might just say something in the normal course of conversation, but I take it as offensive and I feel offended and I blame that person for offending me. So this reveals to us some of these, if we think about it, if we actually analyse and think about it, particularly when we challenge the person and they said, look, no offence meant. There was absolutely nothing in my mind intending to offend you. So when we have that circumstance, it should show to us that this proposal of karma working in this way, it should reinforce for us that it's true. So the way that the karma works is, in the past, I have deliberately tried to offend somebody. And they may or may not take it as offence, but my intention was to offend. And so from the karmic explanation, the idea is that creates a future consequence that I will experience being offended. And the interesting thing is that I may experience being offended when actually there is nobody trying to offend me. That I've just fabricated, somehow I've fabricated that this experience is offensive. And so that's where this line really makes a lot of sense, that when hearing any offensive words, view them as an echo of your own previous action. And so if we think about that, we'll have circumstances where somebody is trying to offend me and I take it as offensive. But there'll also be circumstances where somebody is not trying to be offensive, but I take it as offensive. And thirdly, there'll be circumstances where somebody is trying to offend me and I have no feeling of offence. And so all of those circumstances work into this explanation of karma, that if I have not created the cause, I cannot experience the result. So that circumstance where somebody is trying to offend me, but I feel no offence, it's because I have not created the karma or the cause to experience that result of being offended. So this is a really good analysis to actually check against your own experience in life, or in your workplace or your home life or whatever, that sometimes you will feel offended when there was no intention of offending you, and other times you will not feel offended when there was the full intention by somebody to try to offend you. And they are both explained by this presentation of karma. So here the instruction is when I hear offensive words, I'm taking offence. When I'm taking offence, I should view it as an echo of my own previous action. Yes, sure. No, look, I think there's... So the example here is that the neighbours, that between the two people in the neighbours there is a communication going on that is very offending and offensive to the two people involved, and we are witness. Okay, I think that we have the ability to discern the way other people are behaving to each other, and we can feel a lot of things, but that perception of what's going on can be totally valid. That's not really what we're looking at here, that it's fine for our intelligence to discern that this person A is offending or insulting, abusing person B, and so the way we react to that is something to sort of think about. How am I reacting to it? So it's an aspect of compassion that we are feeling very sorry for the person being offended, right? Which is fair, because they're suffering. But in a broader interpretation is that we can just see the play, the play of everybody's karma in action. A person with an aggressive mind wanting to hurt somebody else is trying to hurt somebody else, and they are creating for themselves future suffering. And if the other person is taking it as a great offence, or they're in that circumstance where there's no escape, unpalatable as it seems, there is some causation somewhere in that circumstance. And also in their ability to not be able to leave, or their ability, there's so many things get wrapped up together in that circumstance. But if your reaction is extreme and causing you distress and suffering, that's something to consider as well. Why it's so, conventionally, it's not unreasonable that we are so offended, let's say, I'll use the word offended, by the suffering of others. Whether it's a war-torn country or whatever. Of course we have, our compassion is activated for the suffering of the people involved. Right? And so, some people will think, Buddhism is sort of pushing aside the reality just under this guise of cause and effect and whatever. The point is, nobody wants to suffer, but we are creating suffering all of the time, and we're witnessing it all of the time. And so, probably the biggest challenge of the Buddhist philosophy for people is the scope of that suffering. I think to understand the real scope of the suffering and the causes, and work your way through that with some sort of wisdom. I think that in many ways is the biggest challenge. And I don't think I'm explaining this properly, because I'm sure some of you are not sort of... But probably the biggest challenge in Buddhism is the reconciliation between seeing the total pervasiveness of suffering, absolutely seeing that pervasiveness of suffering and the way people, animals, everybody are creating all these sufferings, and then sort of accepting that as cause and effect, and generating compassion for every element of that interaction, and not being disheartened. I think that's probably, in some ways, is one of the biggest challenges, is to approach that picture of pervasive suffering and of people endlessly causing suffering to each other, and not be disheartened, and develop compassion for all of the aspects of that problem. You know, I think that's so. I don't have a good tip to give you to work through that, but to see also that your reaction is another element of suffering for you, which is not to say that we should be immune to the suffering of others, but we don't necessarily have to be distraught by it. So there's a sort of a complex line between being distraught and suffering yourself and being compassionate and really wanting them not to suffer. So I don't know how to communicate that well, but you know, do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, but being distraught is no solution. You know, that's one aspect. But being compassionate might lead you to act. You know, ring the coppers or whatever, or get out your gun and whatever. You know, like people react. You know, people act out of their perception of the circumstance. If you're distraught, I mean that's an element of this karmic situation, you know. But to be completely immune to it is not good either, you know. So, you know, we should not be immune to the suffering of others, whatever we see. But being distraught is of no benefit to yourself or to anybody else, you know. And the next line is, when your body is afflicted by harms, view this as your previous actions. So this includes accidents, violence from others, illnesses, whatever. You know, from the karmic point of view, all of our physical difficulties are also the result of cause and effect, and the thing to take from this is that absolutely everybody is subject to this. You know, and so the Buddha said aging, sickness, and death are the inevitable consequences of just taking birth. You know, merely taking birth. Aging, sickness and death is inevitable, and unfortunately everybody is subject to that. So, you know, cause and effect affects all of us as ordinary human beings. We are completely subject to this, the suffering of aging, sickness and death. You know, every single person. Then the other lines I just wanted to talk about here is down here on line 80. Mm-hmm. So, to protect the mind of another, so this is, again, from an altruistic point of view, another person here, to protect their mind, avoid all conflict. So the example here of the neighbours fighting or arguing, or one being offensive and the other person being offended, and, you know, abusive situation is for ourselves that one way that we can protect others from feeling distraught or from feeling, you know, challenged by the suffering, you know. So the idea here is that if I never cause any conflict, I am actually protecting the minds of others. You know, so if somebody's very disturbed and aggressive towards me, as much as possible, I should be mute and unchallenging, you know. So the idea of I need to stand up for my rights and push back and challenge and, fight where it's needed to be, where I need to fight, or challenge or stand up and attack back. So here, the advice here is a contradiction of that state of mind, and it's saying that to protect the mind of the other person, to protect their mind, I should avoid all conflict. So it's a very challenging idea that, independent of your own judgment about how you should voice your needs or voice your offence or voice your indignation, stand up for your rights and conflict for the sake of your rights. So this line is actually saying, to protect the minds of other people, we should avoid all conflict. So it's a very challenging line that, to a large degree, contradicts everything that we sort of get exposed to in society. So then, yeah, so the question is whether that means that we should never disagree with other people. I don't believe disagreement per se is conflict. Per se, by itself, disagreement is not necessarily conflict. But our own judgment can tell us whether a person is open to disagreement or not. Like there's some people you can tell they're absolutely not open to disagreement.
Well, you can see how things progress in a certain point. You're crossing a line. You're in the world of conflict.
Yeah, so the question is about crossing a line and going into a world of conflict. Have you got the ability to tell when you're approaching that line? Or do you just want to get over the line and get stuck into it? Like that's the issue, is how willing are we to enter into conflict?
It depends how the other person engages. Some people obviously handle disagreement much better than others.
Yeah, so, the question is about how well you can assess whether the other person is open to disagreement or not. And I think this is saying, if they're not open to disagreement, then you don't disagree with them. And as a result of that, you protect their mind. Their mind stays calm, maybe calm in their own delusion, but calm, and that's something to be valued.
It's a big conversation.
Yeah. So this is why a lot of this is very challenging, because we think I'm right, and I need to tell this person that they're wrong, and we start to elevate the value of rightness above an aversion to conflict. We think that conflict is fine because I need to tell them that I'm right, or that they're wrong, or that, like politics, environmental things, there's so many things where we elevate other agendas above an aversion to conflict. We accept conflict. And this is sort of advising, do not accept conflict. And if it means that you keep your mouth shut, you keep your opinions to yourself, you keep your, you don't speed, park, drive, you go into a car park and there's the two cars going for the same car park, and you just think, to protect that person's mind, I'm backing off.
I'm thinking more of instances where healthy debate.
Yeah, so you can make the assessment. Yeah,
Using rational outcomes actually more beneficial or not.
yeah. Look, you can make the judgment that what do they call it in politics? Robust discussion, is robust discussion is valuable. But the basic assessment here is that if it's causing conflict, then zip it. Don't accelerate into the car park. Don't accelerate into the lane. Don't bip the horn and get moving. You've spent half a second with the light turning green and you haven't moved. Beep, beep, beep. This is saying, don't do that. Sorry?
Very good example.
But, so let's say even here in the Buddhist world, every ordinary student is subject to this thing where, I've learnt this, I know this. And so sometimes then in discussions, there's a passion, there's some passion comes in and people get upset or they get, they're attached to their view. They're attached to their view, they might be wrong, but they're attached to the view they do not want disagreement, they just want to make a pronouncement. This happens everywhere. And so this is sort of advising, okay, do not have conflict. Even though your own, you might think that it's really valuable to communicate your point of view or to stand up for your rights or to get the car park, to, you're in the queue and somebody jumps the queue. You have to make an assessment all the time. But the guideline here is to protect their mind, you avoid conflict and always have patience. That's the advice. And patience, so the definition of patience is a mind willingly accepting an inconvenience or a suffering or a disadvantage. So from a Buddhist definition, patience is a mind which, and this is very important, willingly accepts a loss for the sake of peace, let's say. So all of those examples we're talking about is, you can call them an application of patience, where mentally you see some loss for yourself, some disadvantage, some let's say step down, some sort of lowering of yourself or something. You see it in those terms. And so the mind of patience is a mind which willingly accepts that loss for the sake of not harming others.
So is it conflict if you say to someone, look, I can understand that you believe that? That's not quite how I see it.
Yeah, so this is what I was saying to Paul, that we have to make some assessment as to whether or not the other person is open to being disagreed with. And basically the guidance here is that if the person is open to a discussion, to a disagreement, or open to your point of view, or open to change, or whatever, all of those sort of circumstances, if they are, then you can discuss, you can disagree, you can argue, you can lobby, you can debate. But if they're not, If they're not, and you have the perception that this will cause conflict, then say nothing.
Point back before that, isn't that, where you might think that something's quite important. You're not going to tell them your view, you're just going to say you accept their view as valid at one level, but that's not your view. Because some things are important and you know it's not your view.
Yeah, so what you're saying is absolutely correct. You have to make some judgment. But the key giveaway in your presentation of that is when you think something is important. Okay, so what that indicates is that in your mind there is something elevated up to this importance. And that justifies you challenging somebody else. So that's the trap, is that our sense of being right and something being important allows us to create conflict with somebody else. And that's, you know, like in the world of geopolitics and, you know, wars and all that around the world, they start from somebody thinking that what I think and what I believe is important.
Thinking about it, we were watching the news tonight. Someone who's standing who said, "There's all these home invasions. The world's a really dangerous place," which was quite upset. And I said, "It is possible it's on the moving or not." And that was still really.
Yeah.
Because I don't think she's accurate, but I wasn't going to have a fight with her or discuss it. I just think she's already upset.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so the question is about watching the news and reacting to it. So, you know, there's a whole thing on the internet called rage baiting. And the idea, and what they call the attention economy. You know, there's this idea of what's called the attention economy, where the internet's main function is to engage you, right? And so there's been this massive growth of semi-news items or posts or people saying things or, you know, like I see it on unfortunately I wouldn't call myself addicted, but somebody else might. Somebody else may call me addicted, but I do have my fair share of this rubbish coming into my mind every day. But I can see, and whether it's you know, some back room in Moscow or whatever trying to undermine Western society, or whether it's just people creating this stuff to get your attention. But there is an endless procession of stuff to make you enraged, to make you feel offended, to make you feel enraged. But all I want to do is keep your attention so that you see the adverts, or you create their metrics that causes them to be paid by Google or paid by Facebook or paid by Instagram or whatever, because they've got the attention of 100,000 or 1 million or 10 million people. And I think a lot of it is just cherry-picking news items and feeding them to you so that you're enraged at the whatever it is, you know. And unfortunately, it's just so pervasive. But if you look at it and you see that the intention of this is to enrage me, you know, you can learn from it. The algorithms that are feeding you things. So yeah, it's quite destructive, I think. But anyway, so let's just do a little bit of meditation. But yeah, just in summary, I'd really like if you read this, and you'll see they're 1, 2 or 3 line little jewels. They are jewels. And find some, think about them, and then try to recollect them in your life. And I think you'll find that they can be really beneficial. So, could I ask if there's anybody here for the very first time tonight? No? Good, everybody's a regular, it's great. Okay. So just become aware of where your mind is, what's happening in your mind, and bring it like within yourself, and let all of the thoughts go away, drop away from your mind. So your mind becomes very clear, and then turn your attention to the breath, just coming in and going out. So the awareness, like the awareness of the breath coming in, going out, the ebb and flow of the breath, and hold that as your object. Not changing the object, no distraction, no sleepiness, just hold 100% that ebb and flow of the breath. Just relax your mind a little bit. Then, using that calmness in your mind, let's examine this circumstance of being offended and have a look in your own life for situations where somebody said something to you and they intended to offend you and you became offended. And then a situation where somebody said something to you without the intention to offend you, but you became offended. And the situation where somebody intended to offend you, but you were not offended. So just look from your own life, those different circumstances, and try to have a very clear idea of what happened, and then think about this idea of cause and effect and habituation and experiencing a result similar to the cause. So just spend a few minutes thinking over those circumstances. In particular, recollecting circumstances where you felt offended, but it was a complete misinterpretation. Okay. Bring your concentration back to the room. Yeah, I must say I was not short of examples where I felt offended, where I thought I heard an offence or I felt something quite critical, abusive, offensive, but actually there wasn't. It wasn't there. But I felt offended. I could think immediately of a few circumstances where somehow I got it completely wrong. So anyway, we've got some time now for questions or discussion. Yeah, so the question is about family discussions. Look, I think a great aspect of a family is that ability to talk, really robust discussion, as they call it. But when you were saying that, the thought that popped into my mind is that they often say that a civil war is the worst war because it can be like brother versus brother. And, there's something incredibly destructive about that type of civil war, that type of war. And so, I feel, and I think it's happening in political systems all over the world, the divisional points of view are sort of getting further and further apart for whatever reason. The polarization of political view is becoming more and more extreme, and it seems inherently more and more abusive of the other viewpoint, whatever, for what, so that's to be avoided. But I think the great value of family conversations, if people can let go of their attachment to a viewpoint, then they can be of great value to the children to see that, to be able to think, to learn how to think. I think that sort of thing is really, really important. My own upbringing, I'm not too sure I had that freedom, but there was plenty of discussion. But I think that some people are very lucky that they have a really learning experience around the dinner table. So that's to be encouraged if you've got children, to somehow create that environment. Really, but
I suppose, like, I'm thinking in the wider, like,
yeah.
people rather than kids sitting around the table, but if one person, if my sister, for example, has a very opposing view to me on a lot of political topics, for me to back off a bit and not challenge her is probably a very positive thing.
Yeah.
But to listen to her and to hear her out rather than lock the topic completely.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where you need wisdom. You need wisdom to be able to find the right balance between open discussion and challenging somebody's ideas with the wish for them to maybe be less fixated or something. But I think it seems in the world at the moment that that's becoming more and more difficult. So anyway. Yeah. So the observation is about, whether there seems a lot more conflict. So whether there is more conflict in the world or not that's a very interesting question. But certainly the presentation to us is, of endless items of conflict. But unfortunately, we have access to the smallest argument somewhere in the world, unfortunately we have that immediate access. But one of the things you were saying there triggered my thinking that, and you wonder what the motivation is probably to weaken a country or weaken a government or weaken a community, I don't know, or it's just a perverse, destructive motivation. But I was reading something from one of the tech moguls, and he was, there's people there's people that have like 50,000 or something identities on the Instagram or on Facebook or whatever. And if you want to create a certain disturbance or whatever, you can engage these 50,000 bots to create all these comments and aggravate people, or, you know, sort of create arguments on the internet. And the person was making the observation that the internet may just deteriorate into all of these bots just talking to each other, you know, and abusing each other, and the humans disappear out of the internet. And it's just all these robots all creating abuse and trying to trigger the person. So all you have to do is often go to somewhere where there's open comments. And it could be something about car racing or hockey or thing, but if the comments are open and unmodulated, there's just this endless sort of abusive political or cultural or social or racial or whatever abuse goes on in the comments. And you think, what's that all about? Like, and the question now is, are they real people, or is it some fake identity just aggravating people or whatever? I don't know. Look, it's a complex question, but unfortunately a very disheartening situation. Okay, so thank you very much for coming tonight and listening and the questions. But once again, you're most welcome to take these home and keep them. If you don't want to take them, that's fine. But I would recommend to read it, to think about it. Some of them, you know, if they don't make much sense, just gloss over them and go for the ones that you know, where you can see the meaning easily, and then hopefully that at some point you can draw on them and they'll help you. Yeah, so we'll continue next week. So just think that, you know, to think about these things is something very special, to meditate together, to talk, to share. You know, these are all really valuable things, and that this virtue, we can call that a virtue. This takes the form of a ball of white light, and it comes to the crown of your own head and completely dissolves down into you, filling your body with light, but also filling your mind with clarity, and maybe dispelling all aggression or resentment. Imagine your mind completely free of aggression, resentment, indignation, you know, having no will for conflict, you know, completely being averse to conflict. Fully accepting all of your experience as the echo of your own past actions. So then from that point, imagine rays of light going out to every other living being and bringing them happiness. Imagine all living beings in front of you and rays of light going out to every living being, bringing them happiness. And then dissolve that light back into yourself. Okay, so thank you very much. And so I have one more week to go. And after all of the excitement of last week, we're now back to the normal program this week. So Geshe Doga teaching tomorrow night, and then Geshe Lobsang on Wednesday night. So I don't know if you were able to come to some of the events last Tuesday, but we're back to normal now. So so thank you very much. And there should be a cup of tea and some biscuits or cake up in the dining room. So thank you.